Today's session, who will live and who will die, living inside the Unetanah Tokef, with Rabbi Susan Goldberg. I was just saying I heard her speak for the first time on Sunday morning at the rally, very, very moved. And also Jenna Fields, we worked together for many years on grants, on how to help other people. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the introduction. I worked at the Jewish Federation for 6 years and was involved with the evolution of the emergency cash grant program. If you remember the recession that hit our community so hard, and the Federation is still giving out homeless grant support to this day. So it's such a privilege to be here speaking with all of you. I know we just gave out tons of stuff. If you don't mind putting it under your seat, it's just resources for you for after this conversation today. I'm so privileged to be here with Rabbi Susan talking about this issue. Our expertise at Sharsheret is breast and ovarian cancer, but this conversation today is much bigger than that. It's about how we support our loved ones facing cancer and other illnesses. And I want to start off by sharing a story. We have a volunteer at Sharsheret who 5 years ago was new to Los Angeles. And she wanted to meet new people, so she joined one of the local synagogues. And very soon after she joined the synagogue, she found out that she was diagnosed with breast cancer. But she's a very resilient woman. She was gung-ho about treatment and wanted to move ahead and still continue to be engaged with her synagogue. And she saw there was a sisterhood event that she really wanted to go to. And it just so happens that right before the event, she got an infection and was going to be attending that event with an IV pack that she carried. And it was visible, but she tried to keep it hidden, but she wanted to give the host of the sisterhood event a heads up. So she emailed the host of the sisterhood event, told her that she was carrying this IV pack, and she sent an email, "Is it okay if I still come?" And the woman who was having the event said, "I think it's better if you stay home." This is a synagogue in Los Angeles. This was just a few years ago. And the reason I think that story is so powerful is because we are all people who are empathetic and compassionate and want to do everything we can to support people. And just by attending this session, I know that of each of you. But sometimes it's really hard to put that in practice in the culture of our community. And
Jenna, what was her condition?
Breast cancer.
What did you say she had?
What does that look like?
An IV pack.
An IV, yeah.
What
does it look like, an IV pack?
She had an infection, so it was a little bit of, and she had a cord with an infusion. Yeah.
So it just tearing a little thing out of her arm.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, right. So it's shocking and it's upsetting. And for us as leaders in our community, how do we create a tone? How do we create a culture of caring, not just during the high holidays throughout the year, but throughout the year? So, Rabbi Susan, I know is going to go first.
Yeah, I wanted to share, especially around, I'll just say first, I'm Susan. I was at Wilshire Boulevard Temple. I have just left Wilshire Boulevard Temple. And we have a independent spiritual community called Nefesh, which was a community inside the community of Wilshire and is now standing on its own. And we'll be meeting at the Silver Lake JCC. It's in the Silver Lake Los Feliz area of LA where there is no temple and where I grew up. So I should just say what I'm doing right now.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It's crazy times. It's a little bit of a crazy thing to do.
It is. It's very hard.
We commend you. Thank you. So a little over 2 years ago, I found that I had this weird sensation going on in my ear. And it took some time to get to hear it was just other than something that was normal and would resolve. For them to figure out that I had very rare cancer called a nasal pharyngeal carcinoma, NPC. And it was a growth that was growing on my eustachian tube in my ear. The nasopharynx obviously is the top of the pharynx, the part behind the nose in front of the ear. And in my case, it was right in my ear. And it's a very rare cancer, and when it happens usually ethnically specific, which is for Asian men. So there you go.
We're in Koreatown.
Well, yeah, it was very wild experience, especially because, I'm a person who's always been tremendously healthy. So there's a big sort of unsolved mystery as to how this happened and where it came from and all of that sort of continues on in other worlds. But in this world, what it was like to have this diagnosis, and then I had a 4-month treatment, so it's a very treatable form of cancer. It's just a very grueling treatment because it involves daily radiation, 7 weeks of daily radiation. And the radiation process, for those of you who don't know, some of you I assume might know, either from loved ones or from yourself. But in my case, because it was head and neck, you're fitted with this mask that is put over you real tight and kind of bolted in. And then the radiation treatment just takes about 5 minutes, but it's every day inside this mask for 7 weeks. So 5 days a week for 7 weeks. And before that, they do something they like to do called induction chemotherapy, to do 3 rounds of chemotherapy to see if they can shrink the growth before it. So it's very grueling because it's a combination of both chemo and radiation. And during the radiation, you get some extra chemotherapy just for funsies. So the treatment is called chemoradiation. And it was physically grueling and emotionally and spiritually, obviously. And it ended September 1st of 2017. So it was 3 weeks out from the high holidays.
Whoa.
And for me, it really felt important to be there on the high holidays. I probably could have missed it that year. But it was also an organizing beacon, I think. And I did a lot of sort of writing on Post-it notes to gather thoughts for a sermon. And the sermon that year for me was about the Unetanah Tokef prayer, as it was the next year from a different angle. But this idea of who will live and who will die becomes alive in a different way when you're undergoing treatment. And because of how prevalent cancer is, and now they're saying something like 1 in 4, have you heard this? That 1 in 4 of everyone is going to have some form of cancer in their lifetime. I mean, that's like crazy. I heard that, and the person who told me, I said, I think your statistic might be off. And then I looked it up, and it's true. So it's really prevalent, right? I mean, so you can assume that all of your congregants have either had cancer themselves, have it now, or it's a loved one who's close or a good friend, right? So everybody is affected by it. But when you're living inside of it, I mean, just even this thing about aging, which is so important to talk about, but is such an assumption that people are going to age, right? And when you're living, I never thought about that before until I realized how prevalent that's just said. Oh, but when you grow older and it's like, well, some people are not going to age in a long-term kind of way. And so I have now shifted my language when I talk about aging, for sure, because it's an assumption about people aging. That is not true for everyone. And just the immediacy of what it is to be looking like this was my thing about like, will you live and will you die? It was kind of here, and then as the process went, it got to here. Now it's about there, I'd say. So it's not exactly in my face at all, or even in my peripheral vision, but it is sort of there. And what I like to tell congregants every year, at Yom Kippur especially, right? It's this opportunity where people, the rabbis, are so incredible in creating, through prayer and through our ritual actions, this confronting of death, right? On Yom Kippur. That's a lot of what we're doing. We remember Kittel, we look at this who will live and who will die, and this book of life, we don't eat, we take some of our life force away. So much of Yom Kippur is about, if you sit with the reality of your dying, how is that going to change how you live, right? That's a lot of how I see what Yom Kippur is. And for people for whom they're not living with the reality of their dying, that's like, okay, let's try this on and see if it sparks some new action for me. But if you are living with the reality of your dying, what I like to think about Yom Kippur is that the whole community is going to join you in this place today. So you're in this scary place every day, and it can feel really lonely. But right now, our whole community is going to join you in this place today. And the hope would be that after today, there would be some more empathy and compassion as everybody goes out into their lives where they're not confronting this, that they hold on to some experience of what it was like to live in that, but in an everyday kind of way. One of the things that I have done after, I've always supported congregants with cancer because it's a part of, right, all of our congregations. People come to seek help from you. Obviously, it's a different thing for me now. And I have many more people reaching out, especially mothers with kids. I have kids, and one of them was quite young when this was happening. So there is also a whole other layer when you're thinking about will I live or will I die, which has to do with not just your own living and dying, but about what it would be like for their kids to lose their parent. So there is a way in which there is a kind of support and solidarity that I think can happen on Yom Kippur that is unique to Yom Kippur. That we as rabbis have an opportunity to open up and name and say, we're all here in this place with you today. And we want to be with you as we move forward. The other thing that I wanted to point out is about language and about cultivating curiosity for people. One of the things that is most challenging is the things that people will say to you when you have a cancer diagnosis. It is extraordinary, things that come out of people's mouths. So even just having an opportunity to speak with congregants about things that are helpful to say and things that are not helpful to say. And one of the biggest things is just to enter in a state of curiosity. I've heard about your diagnosis. How are you doing? What does this mean for you? I'd like to learn a little more about how it's going for you. That is always better than making a statement about such as this. You must be so brave. Oh, you're so courageous. You don't know what this is like for me. I don't feel brave. I feel like I have no choice in this but to get up and do the radiation every day. Is that brave? I guess. It's not the framework, though. And or to say, this is so awful. It's like, okay, maybe if I know you and you're giving me empathy, okay. But what I'm really looking for, and what folks who are really looking for, is just opening with curiosity to what people are going through.
Can you say what you said again? I mean,
Yes.
that was really helpful.
Yes.
So
How are you?
How are you? I've heard about your diagnosis. How would you say how's it going for? I mean,
Yeah,
can you
I've
tell
heard
me
about
about
your
it?
diagnosis, and I'm wanting to connect with you and hear how is this going for you.
Okay.
What are you thinking about these days? What are you feeling? What is today like? That's also so important in the dailiness because things feel different on different days. I don't know if you know about a cycle of chemotherapy treatment. Some of you may or may not be familiar, but usually some people have it's all different too. You shouldn't also assume that somebody wears a port and they maybe get daily chemo. Somebody wears a port and they may get chemo once every 3 weeks, chemo once every 2 weeks. I did once every 3 weeks, which is for those 3 sessions, which is somewhat common, and you feel kind of okay for the first couple days, and then you tank, and then you feel, for like a week, you feel terrible, and then you start to feel better. So day by day, it's also different, and talking to people on different days is hugely different. So how are you today is always a good question when you're speaking to somebody. Yes?
Well, you keep going. I'll throw this out, and then you can address it as you wish. What's occurring to me is, yes, I have chaplaincy training. I've worked with people with illnesses and long-term, and I ran all kinds of support groups. But we're rabbis, and you're a rabbi, and what tends to happen, I find, is that the person comes, or friends of theirs come, and my first line of questioning is, "What's your Hebrew name? Can I? What? I want to help you," and that's great. But in the process of that, is there a way in which a rabbi or someone like that can be, okay, I heard your issue, now how can I solve the problem?
Right. That's just, I would say, in general.
We want to Misha Be'erachilu
Right.
and go to the healing circle, and here's my magical wand.
Here's what we're going to do, right.
Yeah, thank
so
you.
I would just say in general, whether it's
Do more
cancer
listening.
or divorce or anything,
Okay.
that always leading with empathy is the way to start.
Yeah.
Also asking somebody, would it be okay if we prayed on your behalf?
Mhm.
And asking if that would be okay. Asking if they're okay with the news being shared. I mean, I think this is basics, but you would be surprised. Is it okay? I was so uplifted personally by all the people saying we should bear on my behalf. The fact that it was being said in temples, in mosques, in churches by my interfaith friends, that lifted me on a daily basis. Some people don't want it to be known. So I always offer, if somebody says, no, I'd rather the community didn't, I usually follow up and say, would it be okay if I include you in my personal prayers? And generally people are open to that. I don't know if you always do that, but I tend to do that. I say there's the communal prayers that we say out loud, and then there's the personal prayers I can offer you in my daily prayers. Is that okay? And generally people will respond to that. So around the cultivating curiosity, really listen to the language they're using about their cancer. Okay? Everybody has a different way of talking about it. So if they are using that, I'm fighting this, it's a battle, it's between me and the cancer, and I'm going to win, right? They're giving you a clue around the metaphor that works for them. Metaphor and imagery in this process, I can't tell you how important it is. And people lock into a metaphor that works for them, but it is different for everybody. That does not work for me personally. All of the battle stuff I found reprehensible. I didn't want to. This was my own body with cells that divided inside my own body. This was not some foreign object that came, and I'm not in a war, for me personally. So when people use the battle language around me, which is super common with cancer, I found it really upsetting, and I didn't want to have the conversation. You go fight that cancer. You're going to win the battle. And here's a huge, huge language thing. Please don't ever say, and I've gotten in that. Now I have friends in media, and when I see a show of theirs and they use this language, I call them and I say, don't ever say that again. A person lost their battle to cancer.
Right.
Do not ever say that. That winners and losers, they somehow lost. They're a loser because they died. Ah! That is so upsetting. This is partly why I stay away from the survivor language, because I think it's a negative connotation on those that die, right? Mm-hmm. We survived and you punks didn't, or whatever. Not that that's not what people mean, but you know, that's why I use the language of land.
What is the language you use again?
Okay, so Susan Sondheim says this in her cancer, right, as metaphor, which you should all read if you haven't. It's short and it's powerful. Sorry, Sontag.
What is it?
Susan Sontag.
Not Sontag.
Illness
I was gonna-
as metaphor.
Oh,
Susan
so-
Sontag, illness as metaphor. And I was going to show this, but I'll tell you now. It says, she says, it's pretty close to an exact quote, but not exact, that all of us have a passport for the land of the well and the land of the ill. And although all of us want to always be in the land of the well, sooner or later, all of us are going to have to use that other passport. Okay? And to me, that language of it being a land that I was in, with other people who were there too. And then I'm now an expatriate of that. I'm cancer free, thank God, and hopefully will be. But that also means that I was there in that place, and I was with, and the people who are in that land working this out, right? Rather than I'm on a battlefield and I've got these weapons.
So it's a land of the well and
The ill.
The ill.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but it's worth it. You can look up that quote just on the internet of Susan Sontag. Yeah, yeah.
I'm wondering if there's one thing, you know, being a rabbi to those who are struggling, and there's another being looked upon as a role model.
Yeah.
Going through this, and how was that for you, and how are you able to take care of yourself? Like, I don't know if you worked during this, and that kind of image of, oh, well, she can work, and if I go through cancer, or any of that kind of struggle of.
Totally. Yeah, yes, let me answer that. Let me just get through the third piece, and then I want to answer that, because that's really a question that I appreciate it would only get asked here. I appreciate that. Also, I just want to say, because of the radiation, sometimes my eustachian tube closes and opens. So if I put my finger on it, I can hear it because it's too open at the moment. So the last piece I just want to say, so knowing in, just to go over it, knowing in Yom Kippur that everybody has an opportunity to be in a kind of deeper solidarity because of this experience on Yom Kippur. The second is cultivating curiosity. And the third is really understanding that after treatment can be a very difficult time. A lot of people are there for you. They want to bring you meals when you're doing chemotherapy or doing radiation. But then after treatment, people go, oh, you're done now. And truly, emotionally, it's probably the hardest time. Because when you're in treatment, and even if you're going to have to go in through another round of treatment, I'm talking about breaks in treatment, because some people, unfortunately, have to do treatment and then they learn that their cancer comes back and they have to do treatment again. But those break times when you're not in treatment afford a kind of openness for the full weight of the psychic terror and sadness to come onto you. The two people who reached out to me the week after treatment ended were both expatriates or survivors. And they said, how are you doing this week? This week can be hard, don't be surprised. It was like, thank God somebody said it. So that was also something I would let you know as rabbis that has shifted for me since going through this experience when I reach out to congregants who I know are going through it. Is not just, okay, get through it, but when it's over, how are you doing now? Because if there's some extra space to feel when you just have to get up every day to do it, you're kind of doing it. And for me, I also I'm an athlete, run marathons. So for me, it was also this athletic thing about get up, do what you got to do. And then when you don't have to do that, like you have to open up to just like, whoo, rest and recovery. And that's a really different experience than having this daily, doing. So I would put that out there, that reaching out to congregants or family members or close friends too in your lives right after treatment ends is a really good time. Same thing with the offer of childcare, food, all of those things that people may think you have covered now is really helpful right after. And the other, so now I want to get to your question. What was it like to be a rabbi during this period? I did continue to work, especially during the first rounds of chemotherapy. And then at a certain point, a couple weeks into the radiation, it was not possible. It was very, very grueling, just on all kinds of physical and emotional levels. But I lost my hair, right? They said it would happen 2 weeks, and I was like, no, it won't. It's like, oh God. I was at Occidental College giving a blessing for their graduation. And I was sitting with the program, and there were a couple I have a lot of hair, and there were a couple I was like, oh, a couple little things are falling on my program. It's weird. And then I was like, oh my God. After a couple more fell, it didn't come all at once, so they were strands of hair. And I was like, I think my hair is falling out. And that was such an odd thing to hold this white piece of paper program and see these little blonde things falling. Which was exactly at the 2-week mark. So I had a wedding to do, and I had this thing around wanting to keep as much hair as I could for the wedding to officiate. This is so interesting because nobody asked these questions. This is only like a rabbi would know to ask this. But so I had a hat that I was wearing because I had strands of hair left. But if you looked under the hat, it was kind of patchy because just so you know, it doesn't fall out right all at once. It comes in these little weird patches. And so I had this hat on, and I kept it on so that I had some strands of hair by the time I got to the wedding, which was, I think that was like a little over a month after treatment. And so the ritual my husband and I did was like the wedding was done. It was a Memorial Day weekend. And then on that Monday, it's on the Sunday, on the Monday, he went ahead and shaved my head because I made it to the wedding and then it was time to. And I can tell you that for me, shaving my head all the way shaved with then a razor, like a straight razor, like I want it was all gone. It was so much more liberating than the strands of hair. But then it was a question of how do I want to lead services? Sure. I found that I did in my life, I did not want to wear a wig. or a hat. That there was something about, okay, this is it right now. And I was go to cafe, restaurant, whatever. I just completely bawled, and that felt the most comfortable to me. But it was this trying to decide around services what to do, mostly because of just how other people felt and wanting the focus to be on our mitzvah kid or whatever, not on my hair. So I noticed the situations that I wore the hat and the ones that I didn't. And that was very telling to me around my own comfort level and around the kind of environment that it was. There's more to say about that because it also has to do with the internal dynamics of the temple space I was in and which place I felt was safe than others. But I did, you could look this up online, I did a sermon in which, in the Nefesh community, I did take off my hat and talk about what it was like to not have the hair and talk about sort of the inside of the cancer journey. And you can find that sermon online. I have some challenging feelings about that because it's like the sermon that most people have seen, where I've done lots of sermons like that hair. So, but in any case, that's a sermon that's online that you can see. Yeah.
I don't know if you're going to get to it, but I hope at some point we'll kind of get to it. Based on your perceptions, when you made those decisions whether or not to sort of wear a hat or whatever that you were doing, was this interesting dynamic of your own self-awareness, but also your awareness of the community and
Right.
your consideration and sensitivity to that. And I know that part of the conversation that Jenna introduces is how do we respond to community and community behavior, which isn't necessarily consistent with the sensitivities that we have
Yes.
about these kinds of issues. And so how do we model, educate, frame, correct if necessary, stay silent? What could you shed some light on that? I don't know if that's part of the presentation, but I would.
Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the, Rabbi Steve Leader said something to me at the beginning of this process that has been so true. He said, there's going to be a lot of blessings that come out of this process, but it won't be worth it. And that's exactly how I feel. There's been tremendous blessing on a level that I can't fully explain the depth of blessing that has come out of this. But because sometimes I get frustrated when people do, this is great, there's such good things that come out of this, I always feel like, so I almost like I hold back from saying, but just to tell you honestly the level of tremendous blessing that this is, the going through the struggle has brought to my life and to the people in my life is more than I can count and not worth it. When I go back and have this all not happen, absolutely. But one of the blessings is this awareness of the people in our community who are going through this on a level that I never was and that I feel like I didn't have. That's transformed the kind of space that I could make in the community for people. I think they know they can reach out, but also we can, it comes in my sermons more. Not just about myself, but again, that stuff around assumptions. The saying, but maybe you're not in this place. Maybe you're in a different place where you're in an urgent call to your life, not just at Yom Kippur, but in like a weekly, daily way. I think having conversations about, are people comfortable having their name shared? What does that look like? If they're not comfortable having their name shared out loud, could I continue to reach out to you? Could I find, a lot of what I do, can I find would you be comfortable if I found a congregant who's gone through a similar kind of cancer? That sort of peer-to-peer support and a lot of advocating around support groups is what I do. It's true. Therapists, yes, I think therapy is super important, especially if people have not been in therapy. But support groups, that peer-to-peer support through the cancer support community, the wellness communities, there's a lot of them. Hospitals have them. I imagine you guys have them. Is beyond. It's so important to get peer-to-peer support. So that's a lot of what I feel like I've done around trying to make a different kind of culture so that it feels less isolating and less lonely. I think there's a lot of loneliness for people, which I know is true around mental illness too, in communities when you don't know that you can talk about it or talk about it in a way that will feel heard.
I just want to put in about 25 minutes left in the session.
Yeah.
So.
There we go.
No. So maybe I think that's your question is a good jumping off point. The framework that I want to give you all in how do we move forward to help, and thank you, Rabbi Susan, for, I've learned so much, I've been taking notes. the framework that I want to give you is say something, do something, support the cause. And Rabbi Susan talked about this idea of, and Rabbi Hoffman, you alluded to it, of we want to fix it, we want to jump in and help this person, and carving out that space. I can't tell you how often we hear from women that no one even acknowledged that they were going through it. Mm-hmm. And I think, I come from the Reform movement, and it was not taught to me that you go to your rabbi when you're going through something difficult. That's just not the culture that I grew up in. And a rabbi from this community was telling me recently that she'd been working with a family on the son's bar mitzvah, and was really close with them, saw them every week, and it was through Facebook that she found out that the mother of the son was getting prophylactic surgery because she was a BRCA carrier, which I can have a whole other conversation about. And that was how she knew this family that she was very close to, and she saw that. She contacted the family right away and said, I'm here to support you, I saw this, I want you to know I see it. And as a rabbi, as a friend, as a family member, that I see you, that you're talking about is so important, even when people don't necessarily come to you. But the flip side of that is confidentiality. And what I've learned from working in the Sharsheret community is so many people don't want anyone to know.
Yeah.
And as leaders in the community, I ask you to make it part of your job to protect those people as they need it, to shut down gossip, because we know that people kvetch, people talk, and to make sure that this family, because it's the person going through it and it's the caregiver, it's the children, are getting the kind of support from the community that they want, that they need. So one of the things in terms of do something that we think is really important is to create a liaison. Who from the synagogue and who from the family can be the point person in getting updates. People are going to be asking questions. They want to know what's going on. Carpool line and talking to children is not where those updates should be happening, right? So working with the family to find the liaison. There's some great websites out there now. Caring Bridge is one of them, where people can blog about what they're going through and actually not just do meal trains, but activity trains and updates. So, if the person that's part of your community does want support from the synagogue, they can post on this website different jobs that people can do. Maybe it's carpool, maybe it is meals, but maybe it's something else, driving to chemotherapy, shopping. And how can you mobilize your community when appropriate? So let's say the person is public and they do want help. How do you give people in the community assignments? So obviously talking with that family is really important, but who can do carpool after Hebrew school for the family that day? Who can check in? One of the best stories I've heard from one of our Sharsheret callers is she didn't want to see anybody. She didn't want to go to Rosh Hashanah services, and her rabbi actually drove to her house on Rosh Hashanah and blew the shofar. And it turns out that she actually wasn't even there. She was at treatment. He gets there. He calls her. He says, "Where are you? I'm here to blow the shofar." She says, "I'm at chemotherapy right now." And he blew the shofar into the phone. And she'll never forget that. This same woman told me another story. Again, she didn't want any visitors. And she told me that one of her colleagues came to her and said, you should really revisit your visitation policy. This isn't working for me. I want to help you.
Right.
And that, again, has stayed with her because he wasn't following her lead. He wasn't listening to what her leader
So was that
said.
good or bad? I didn't quite get that.
The reason that's bad is
It's
because
bad.
Yes.
right, because
Okay.
for her it was important to not have
Okay.
visitors. And what he was saying was, I'm frustrated, I want to help you.
Right.
You're not letting me help you.
So would there have been a middle position for him, something for him to say that would have acknowledged
Well, he could have said something to the person at the temple to say, hey, I'd like to help more. I know she doesn't want visitors.
Yeah.
She doesn't need to hear any of that.
Right.
You don't need to take care of other people's
Okay.
emotional stuff.
Right,
You're trying
right,
to just
right.
get through it. But it's super common that people lay their emotional stuff on you. You don't
Okay.
need it. And he could, I would say he should not have had the conversation with her.
With her
He
at
could
all.
say to somebody else, I'm
That's
super
very
frustrated.
helpful.
I feel like I'm not helping enough.
That's very-
And just to say that is a lot of
Yeah.
what people feel. They want to help you more. And on the like caring rich kind of stuff, people were frustrated because we were not doing that. And we were not asking for food.
Right.
Specifically because my husband said, I cannot do much in this experience except I can make you food. I'm going to be the one who makes you food.
Yeah.
So when everybody offers, you tell them no. And I was like, honey, we're part of a Jewish community. And it was an issue because the elementary, I was a rabbi for the elementary school, the Sunday school, the nursery school, and the temple wide. Like all of them were like, no, we do meal trains. This is what we do. And so honestly, I had to creatively come up with some solutions. One is that people could bring food to the temple that I could eat on the days I was there. We're happy about that. And the other was that the elementary school principal said, okay, I hear you. Are you sure, you sure, you sure? I was like, so sure. Please do not do a meal train. It would be emotionally upsetting at this point. And she was like, okay, we'll figure something out. And she got tickets for us to go as a family to the Dodger game. And we are huge Dodger fans, and it was such a great day. It was when I had the strength to do it. And it was one of those creative things that came out of really listening. That we didn't want the meal, but I appreciate your love and support. And she's like, no, that's not enough. We're gonna do something. And it was a connected thing that came from listening.
Yeah, and I just want to add, and then we'll take some questions and comments, which is, we hear from a lot of women that they end up playing hostess.
Oh,
right?
right.
So people show up at their door, and then they, how you doing? And they have to
Yeah,
talk about
right.
their treatment and manage the emotions of the person that is coming to the door instead of focusing on themselves.
Same thing often with Shiva.
Right, exactly. And so, people can leave the food on the doorstep. You can come up with creative solutions.
Lots of people leave baskets,
Yeah.
They say put the food here.
Right. So, sorry, go ahead.
Well, I just have a question about, I understand with the outer circle.
Yeah.
And as a rabbi, everybody thinks they're part of the inner circle,
Yeah.
but you don't want too many visitors. But any ideas on when it's really like your family?
Yeah.
And you're like, no, I don't want you to see me like this. And in some ways, it's not your job to take care of your family, but in other ways, especially as it comes towards end of life. Any ideas of how to kind of navigate allowing family to visit, but also allowing the person some space?
So one thing that we encourage a lot of people who are navigating the caregiver piece is if the caregiver wants to be present and it's the kind of relationship where that's appropriate, then they can be the note taker. They can be the one coming to the appointments, making sure that everything's written down or even recording it and transcribing it later. Being there to help advocate for people is really huge. You're talking about adult relationships.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, where, like my mom kept telling her siblings, don't come, don't come, don't come. They're all in New York. And
Right.
they came.
Right.
She needed it, and it was good that they came, but for her it was like,
She didn't want to ask for that help. And part of that is understanding the nuance of the relationship.
Yeah.
Every situation is different. If the siblings knew they needed to be there, but she was afraid to ask for help, or she didn't want to be seen, at least they came, and then they're physically there, and she can choose whether she wants to see them or not. But giving the caregiver something to do is really important, and the onus doesn't necessarily have to come from the person who's going through the treatment. Sometimes the onus is on the caregiver to say, okay, what can I do here? Maybe it's researching financial assistance or researching support groups that are in the area, or maybe the caregiver who's just trying to manage their emotions finds a peer supporter of another caregiver who's going through it, so they can talk about what they're going through together.
Can I say on the caregiver piece that there's research that shows that the stress level on the caregiver is actually greater than on the person going through treatment?
Wow.
And I can tell you in my case that I absolutely found that to be true. And those of you with, especially if you have a partner, you can just imagine them going through something. That the caregiver getting support It's huge. And as a rabbi, I would really encourage you not just to reach out to the person who's going through cancer diagnosis and treatment, but also to the primary caregiver. And ask if they want to come sit with you and you can support them. Finding them as caregiver support groups, so important, the peer-to-peer support. There's a way in which the person going through it has to get up and go through it and get through it, right? And the caregiver can't take away the physical rulingness and all of that, but the caregiver doesn't have that thing to do, and so often they're in the absolute fear and out of controlness, and it's just looking for something to do, which is why, like I said, my husband was like, I'm going to make the food, right? Finding some way to do something that you feel is meaningful, plus if they have kids, taking care of the kids and having to have conversations with the kids, that can be scary. That's a whole other workshop, but I just want to say one thing about kids real quick that is so important. It's important that kids are told the truth. Developmentally, in developmentally appropriate ways for their age, but the truth. The worst thing is when a kid feels that you lied to them. And so when things change, you have to update the information. And that's something that you can reach out to and call a cancer support group if you're not sure how to say it in a developmentally appropriate way. We had a different conversation with my 5, almost 6-year-old than we did with a 13-year-old and an 11-year-old. They were 2 different conversations, both truthful and developmentally appropriate, right? And one of the statements we said to them is, I know that this is scary, and I want you to know that mommy and daddy are always going to tell you the truth. Right? So then when my oldest was looking on the internet and said, I found some other stuff, I don't know if you told me, I don't know. This looks a lot scarier. Okay, tell me what you saw. Internet, let me tell you, it's so frightening. And he said, it could spread, right? He didn't say that part. And I well, truthfully, it could, but it has not, and the doctors are telling us that's not what they think is going to happen. It's not spreading. So just to say that, 2 pieces, the caregiver getting support and telling children the truth.
And we at Sharsheret, we send families actually a picture book that they can read to their children that talks about what mom is going through and what it's going to look like. So there are great tools out there, whether it's through Sharsheret or another organization. I will give it to you. And that to help bridge the conversation. I know we had a question here and a question here, so Rabbi, how fun do you?
Well, one is personal / religious, and the other is structural. And could you talk more about Sharsheret too? Susan, since you say you run marathons, you're obviously fit, and you have strong spirituality aside from your Jewish. Marianne Williamson was recently saying we have a sickness program, not a health insurance with. So it's and I used to run these kind of support groups, and they were always running at the Jewish Family Service. More and more I see those kind of support groups in the synagogues. The first part is, philosophically, are Jews unprepared or less prepared than, let's say, Buddhists, who or other people who have a more Eastern philosophy of everything is ephemeral. We are stuck in some ways with the Western consciousness. Is there a way to address this stuff preemptively, emotionally, philosophically, that people do know that people get sick and we will all die, and I don't know how I'll deal with it because I'm very physical, but there are ways to preemptively prepare people. Secondly, are there ways to preemptively prepare congregations with chesed committees and these sorts of things? So it's not all falling on the rabbi or the individual or the family or their best friends, but it instantly, it gets to the appropriate support community, whether it's somebody who just had a member die or somebody whose kid is mentally ill or whatever. Somebody who has no money, needs somebody to come and cook food for them. But that kind of a structure or a support community that would be there when somebody says, hey, yesterday I was the guy supporting somebody, but today my wife needs the support.
If I could jump in, I think that's in this framework, the support the cause piece that's so important.
Yeah.
I think as Jews, we like information and we like to be proactive culturally.
Yeah.
And so, these kinds of educational programs that we do. Sharsheret does educational programs focused on breast and ovarian cancer and the BRCA impact on the Jewish community, the Ashkenazi Jewish community. But part of it is the destigmatization that we all can work on within the community about talking about cancer, about talking about these issues, so that when it does happen to people, they already know that there's a community of support that they can go to, that you've already carved out that space. And I was just talking with one of the rabbis this morning about a program that he did on cancer, and it actually brought out people that he didn't even know had already gone through it, who shared their stories with him for the first time. So how do we create a space where it's okay to be open about this and that recognize that cancer and illness is an issue in the Jewish community that has impacted all of us? I think that's the first part of it. I think that if you have the resources to develop a caring committee, it can truly make a difference in creating that extension of the culture that you want to set at your synagogue of how you're going to respond to people when they're going through illness. And I always think of Temple Aliyah because I think they have an incredible caring community committee that has gift baskets ready to go, that sends emails to check in with people. Obviously recognizing that if it's volunteer-led, there are limitations. I sent a confidentiality agreement to one synagogue I was working with recently who was trying to build this because that's a huge part of this too, right? But who are going to be the people that are going to be able to support the clergy in making sure that congregants are feeling loved and validated? So those are some of the ways. I also think that the LA community is very lucky to have things like the Ezra Network, which is a social worker in the synagogue program that's actually run through the Federation. Knowing what resources are available or knowing who to ask. Again, for Sharsheret, it's breast and ovarian cancer, but there are resources available, and I'm happy to connect you with the right one.
I want to just say a word on what you were asking at the beginning. I feel like we are richly resourced with text and prayer that absolutely prepare us for the spiritual journey of going through this.
I mean, I agree with you and I don't. Culturally, people are...
Culturally, we're within the dominant American culture that's very afraid of death and dying and never talks about it. So that's true. We have to deal with sort of this total aversion and fear. But if we go to our traditional text, if we allow kids to go to funerals, which they should do when loved ones die, then they see it, then they know. And then when you're a teenager, you go to funerals. When you're a young adult, you should go to funerals, right? There is this death phobia that keeps people away from talking about death and dying, that we have the opportunity as an ancient people to remember that death and dying is a part of our culture in a way that people can be more familiar sooner, and I think it really helps them. But certainly there are prayers and texts.
So just to scratch, because that's I think at the core of this that I'd like to be able to take away is how do we emulate for our communities that kind of thinking, and maybe going through your own personal experiences, and if you want to share a little bit about what would you like instead of the just sort of how are you holding up question or the sort of what's it like for you today kind of question, which would be very helpful, validating, right? There is this whole sort of sphere of a community out there, a culture that is really deeply inbred with these kind of, fears of death, and we are absolutely susceptible to them in our communities to a fault. So as much as Judaism has this incredible toolkit to embrace it, we've got the Jews walking in who just, are really in some ways detrimental to communities. So I suppose I would want to be angry, be like, you should be nicer kind of thing. I don't think that is very resonant with people. So I'm wondering if you have some insight, what language can we take back with us that I can help to provide for my community who I want to sensitize to this, because there is a very positively on my optimism. There is a great sensitizing to the many varieties of life in our world today.
Yeah.
How can I add this to the world?
Yeah, I think there are two things that I heard in your question. One that where I thought you were going at the beginning is the toolkit idea. I just want to open up that toolkit a little bit with an example, which is that the morning blessings, the Birkot HaShachar, they are so helpful as blessings that can be of support during this, both for the person going through it and for a caregiver. Looking through those is what I do with a lot of people. I sit with the Birkot HaShachar and you go through each one. So does something about this resonate to you as something that could help support you? So one of them for me that I used and said all the time, Asali Kol Zorki, who gives me everything I need. I said that every time before they, strapped in the mask. And for me, it was about gives me all I need and doesn't give me what I don't need. That to me was encapsulated in that prayer. So I need the radiation to take away the growth, but I don't want the radiation to go anywhere else and harm anything else. So I said that blessing every single day, right? Every time it went on. Also in other moments when it was feeling very difficult, that sense of gives me all I need was what I found helpful. So using the resources of the prayer book, I tend to do that just in general with people, but that section is really helpful. And that also means that in a prayer experience with the community there, you could choose a prayer to open up in this way and say, if you're a person going through a cancer diagnosis or a terminal illness, maybe this prayer can open this up for you. And also another way, if you're somebody going through a chronic pain, if you're, I use prayer that way in all kinds of ways. I change the gender language so that I open it up. And I think that there's ways that in our doing of services, small things that we say impact the community. And I just want to open that as a possible resource for people is looking at those particular prayers because they can be prayers that can be repeated to help in this process.
And if I could just add, there's so much great stuff going on in our community. So Etz Chaim, for example, does a Shabbat every year for people who've gone through cancer. My own synagogue where I grew up, Temple Israel of Long Beach, has people stand for the different aliyot during the Rosh Hashanah service, honoring people who are caregivers, honoring people who are going through treatment. There's a great story that one of our volunteers told me about how when she was going through treatment, she did a text study with her rabbi on the meaning of suffering. And for that was the best thing that she could have done to explore how she was feeling about her fear of death. It can be very personal, but there are these collective experiences that you can do. And I just want to go back to that, giving people permission to discuss their faith through these experiences. Because it feels clunky sometimes. As a lay person, I'm a social worker, I'm not a rabbi, it feels clunky sometimes to talk about how my faith impacts my fear of death. And I would guess that most average people like me don't even know what the Jewish philosophy is on death.
Yeah.
And one of our volunteers told me recently that when her grandmother died, she said to her rabbi, well, now she's an angel looking over me. And her rabbi said, you don't believe in angels.
I think I know who that is.
So,
There's angels everywhere.
I'm not calling anyone out, but, and so regardless of what, the Jewish philosophy is, that was how this person was experiencing a death, and she was shut down for it.
Which I think comes back to that beginning piece around cultivating curiosity and really listening to the language that people are using.
Yeah, Rabbi Schmidt.
Hi everyone, I'm Zach, Temple Akiva. I wanted to share just a little something that resonated with me that someone who had gone through a recovery shared. He said that this made me realize that I'm weaker than I ever imagined I was, but at the same time that it revealed a strength I never knew I had. And just juxtaposing those two, because it put a name to that weakness. I mean, we're flesh and blood. But it revealed, in his case, and he said, in my case, it revealed a strength that I never knew I could tap into.
Yeah.
I wanted to share that as well.
Thank you.
I know that we're out of time, but
Just
how did
say
you
your
handle?
name, so
Oh,
we're all
I'm
here.
Judy Greenfeld, and I'm part of the Nachshon Minyan. I'm wondering how you handle people's pity. And like, and if you, and when was it too personal to share? Like, some people really are uncomfortable, so
Yeah.
how did you deal with that?
Yeah, I think
We have
internally.
like 2 minutes to see
2
the
minutes.
last question.
Yeah.
And then you two will be available for
Yeah.
talk after.
Yeah. I would say that part of what I needed to know, and that I often am and do as a rabbi, is there are the words that people are saying, and then I try and think under to what is going on for them under that. And that usually is how I get through those things. Like when people say, oh, you're so courageous, I think in my head, they're thinking this would scare the crap out of me. Right? So I think about their fear, and it makes me feel more understanding of where they're at. It's hard to do that translation, but I try and do that translation. Since you all both just said your names, can we just real quick, since we've all been in together?
Sloan Militia Boulevard Temple. Sarah Burr and Providence Jersey Medical Center.
Susan Lumley, retired from USC.
Moshe Halfon, Vinod Or in the women's prison in Chino. We're actually a synagogue, but, you know.
Thank you.
Janet Bieber, and I'm in the community in La Cañada, La Crescenta, and I do community things and also go to homes for the aging and give Friday evening services to people who live there. Yeah.
I'm Jessica Jablon. I work with Jenna at Sharsheret.
I'm Ben Goldstein. I'm at Big Shoe.
Jonathan Bernard did not read.
Becky Hoffman, Colton.
Joshua Hoffman at Valley Bishop.
John Hanish and Cole Tikva. And I want to
Thank
thank
you,
you both.
everyone.
Thank you.